Starting your own firm. That's the funniest thing I've heard all week. Those were the last words my boss ever said to me. My name is Dante, I'm 29, and I'd been grinding as a marketing strategist at Pinnacle Creative Solutions in Denver for 4 years when I made that declaration. 3 years later, guess whose resume just landed on my desk? Let me paint you the picture of my life back then. 4 years of 70-hour weeks, sleeping in my cramped studio apartment that smelled like instant ramen and broken dreams. I was the guy who stayed until midnight perfecting campaign presentations, who came in on weekends to fix client disasters, who missed family gatherings because the Johnson account needed immediate attention. Pinnacle Creative Solutions was supposed to be my launching pad. We specialized in digital marketing campaigns for mid-sized tech companies across Colorado. I'd joined straight out of college, starry-eyed and convinced that if I just worked hard enough, showed enough dedication, I'd eventually become a partner. My boss, Harrison Blackwood, had this corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rockies. He drove a Tesla Model S, wore custom suits, and had this way of making you feel like you were part of something bigger. My girlfriend Zara had been patient for 4 years, watching me cancel dinner plans and skip her art gallery openings. "You're killing yourself for someone else's dream," she'd say, but I was convinced I was building towards something meaningful. I drafted business plans in my spare time, researched market opportunities, even started building a client network of my own during lunch breaks. Harrison had promised me a senior strategist position with equity stakes after our biggest client renewal. I'd landed the Nexus Technologies account, a $500,000 annual contract that single-handedly boosted our quarterly revenue by 40%. The presentation I'd crafted had been flawless, the strategy revolutionary. Harrison had clapped me on the back afterwards, saying, "This is exactly the kind of thinking that'll get you to the next level, Dante." But when promotion time came, guess who walked into that senior position? His nephew Camden, a 23-year-old business school dropout who couldn't tell the difference between cost per click and cost per acquisition. Harrison called me into his office on a Thursday morning in March, the same office where I'd pitched winning strategies, where I'd saved failing campaigns, where I'd built my entire professional identity. He didn't even look up from his MacBook when I walked in. "Dante, we need to talk about your future here," he said, finally glancing up with that practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "The senior strategist position you were expecting? Well, I've decided to give it to Camden. He's got fresh ideas, and frankly, he brings a different perspective to the team." The words hit me like a physical blow. Harris and I landed the Nexus account. I've been here 4 years. "You promised me—" "I never promised anything," he interrupted, leaning back in his leather chair. "I said there might be opportunities. Camden's family, Dante. He needs this more than you do." Family. The magic word that apparently trumped talent, dedication, and 4 years of loyalty. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not just disappointment, but a deep, burning realization that I'd been played. "What if I told you I was thinking about starting my own firm?" I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. It was desperation talking, a last-ditch attempt to salvage some dignity from the situation. Harrison's face changed. He leaned forward and then he laughed. Not a chuckle, not a polite laugh, but a full-throated, condescending laugh that echoed off the glass walls of his office. "Starting your own firm? That's the funniest thing I've heard all week," he said, wiping actual tears from his eyes. "Dante, you're a decent strategist, but you don't have what it takes to run a business. You think landing one account makes you entrepreneur material? You'd be bankrupt in 6 months." He stood up, walked to his window, and gestured toward the city below. "You see all those buildings? Each one represents someone who thought they could make it on their own. Most of them failed. You're not special, Dante. You're just another employee." The humiliation was complete. I'd bared my soul, my deepest ambition, and he'd crushed it like it was nothing. I cleaned out my desk in a daze. 4 years of work, awards, client thank you notes, and personal mementos went into a cardboard box that felt heavier than it should have. Camden was already moving his things into what should have been my office, hanging up a motivational poster that read, "Success is a journey, not a destination." The irony was suffocating. Zara was waiting for me at our usual coffee shop when I called her. She took one look at my face and knew everything had gone wrong. They gave the promotion to someone else, I said, slumping into the chair across from her. His nephew, a kid who's never worked a real day in his life. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry, Dante, but maybe this is a sign. Maybe it's time to... I told Harrison I was thinking about starting my own firm, I interrupted. He laughed at me, actually laughed, said I'd be bankrupt in 6 months. The words tasted bitter in my mouth. Every insecurity I'd ever had about my abilities came flooding back. Harrison was successful, established, connected. If he thought I couldn't make it on my own, maybe he was right. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the business plan I'd been working on for months. Market analysis, competitive research, financial projections. It all seemed so naive now. Who was I kidding? I was just another employee, just like Harrison had said. Zara found me there at 2 a.m., surrounded by crumpled papers and empty beer bottles. You know what the worst part is? I said without looking up. I actually believed I was building something meaningful there. I thought loyalty mattered. I thought hard work got rewarded. She sat down beside me on the floor. It does matter, Dante. Just not at Pinnacle. Then where? Where does it matter? She picked up my business plan from the floor, smoothing out the wrinkles. Here, in what you're going to build. But I wasn't ready to hear it. The humiliation was too fresh, the doubt too strong. I'd spent 4 years believing in a lie, and now I had to figure out who I really was. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I kept replaying Harrison's laugh, the way he dismissed my ambition like it was a child's fantasy. But as the hours passed, something else started nagging at me. Details that hadn't made sense at the time began forming a pattern. The Nexus Technologies account that I'd landed. Harrison had taken full credit in the company newsletter. The innovative social media strategy I'd developed for the Richardson Group had been presented to the board as Harrison's brainchild. The weekend I'd spent fixing the disastrous Murphy Motors campaign had somehow become a story about Harrison's leadership under pressure. I started thinking about all the late nights, all the strategies I'd developed, all the client relationships I'd built. Harrison had been taking credit for my work systematically, building his reputation on my ideas while keeping me in the shadows. But it went deeper than that. I remembered the conversations I'd overheard, the way Harrison talked about his natural talent for strategy, his intuitive understanding of digital marketing. Except I'd been the one developing those strategies, doing the research, creating the campaigns. Then I remembered something else. 3 months ago, I'd been working late when I'd overheard Harrison on a call with a potential client. He'd been pitching a strategy I'd developed for a completely different company, recycling my work as his own original thinking. At the time, I dismissed it as standard industry practice. Now I realized it was theft. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, a former colleague who'd left Pinnacle 6 months earlier. Hey man, heard about what happened? Not surprised. Harrison pulled the same crap with me. We should grab drinks sometime and compare notes. Compare notes. The phrase stuck with me. How many other people had Harrison screwed over? How many other talented strategists had he used and discarded? I spent the next morning researching Harrison's career trajectory. His rise at Pinnacle had been meteoric, too meteoric for someone who'd started as a junior account executive just 8 years ago. Every major campaign success, every client win, every innovation that had built his reputation. I started to see the pattern. Harrison wasn't a brilliant strategist. He was a brilliant thief, and I'd been his latest victim. I called Marcus that afternoon. We met at a dive bar in Lodo where the music was loud enough to mask our conversation. Marcus was working at a smaller agency now, but he seemed happier, more relaxed than I'd ever seen him at Pinnacle. Harrison's a parasite, he said after I explained what had happened. He finds talented people, squeezes every drop of creativity out of them, then tosses them aside when they start getting too much recognition. How long has he been doing this? Since before I got there. There was this woman, Sarah Chen, brilliant strategist. She developed the framework that became Pinnacle's signature approach. Harrison pushed her out after she started asking for proper credit. Now she's crushing it at her own boutique firm in Seattle. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me Sarah's LinkedIn profile. Her company, Catalyst Strategies, had grown from startup to a team of 20 in just 2 years. Her client roster included some of the biggest names in tech. She's not the only one, Marcus continued. There's a whole network of people who left Pinnacle and went on to bigger things. We call ourselves the Harrison Survivors Club. The pieces were falling into place. Harrison had built his empire on stolen ideas and discarded talent, but what he hadn't counted on was that the people he'd betrayed were still out there, still connected, still creating. I want to introduce you to someone, Marcus said. Rachel Montenegro. She left Pinnacle 3 years ago, started her own firm. She's been looking for someone with your skill set. But I shook my head. I don't want to work for someone else. I want to build something of my own. Marcus smiled. That's exactly what Rachel said when Harrison pushed her out. And you know what? She's been waiting for someone like you to come along. Someone who understands the industry, who knows Harrison's weaknesses, who's hungry enough to take him on. As I drove home that night, I realized something had shifted. The humiliation was still there, but it was being replaced by something else. Anger, determination. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally understand what you're really fighting against. Harrison hadn't just fired me, he'd challenged me, and I was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, I was ready to accept that challenge. Rachel Montenegro's office was nothing like Pinnacle's glass palace. It was a converted warehouse in the River North Art District, with exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and a creative energy that hit you the moment you walked in. Rachel herself was impressive. Mid-30s, sharp suit, but with paint-stained fingers that suggested she still got her hands dirty with the actual work. Marcus told me about Harrison, she said, gesturing for me to sit in a chair that looked like it had been salvaged from a 1960s design studio. Same thing happened to me. I developed the integrated digital strategy that became their signature service. Harrison presented it to the board as his own innovation. She pulled out a tablet and showed me her company's portfolio. The work was stunning, creative, strategic, results-driven. Everything I'd dreamed of creating but never had the platform to execute. Here's what I've learned about Harrison, Rachel continued. He's not just stealing ideas. He's systematically destroying the careers of people who threaten him. Sarah Chen, Marcus, me, now you. We all had the same trajectory. Initial success, growing recognition, then sudden demotion or termination. She showed me a spreadsheet on her computer. I've been tracking this for 2 years. Harrison has pushed out 12 senior strategists in the past 5 years. 12, and in every case he's taken credit for their signature work. The scope of it was staggering. Harrison wasn't just a bad boss. He was running a systematic operation to steal talent and credit. But here's the thing, Rachel said, leaning forward. Every single one of us who left has gone on to bigger things. We're not just survivors, we're competitors, and Harrison doesn't even realize it yet. She pulled up a map on her screen showing the locations of former Pinnacle employees who'd started their own firms or joined competing agencies. The network was vast, spanning the entire western United States. We've been informally collaborating for years, she said, sharing resources, referring clients, supporting each other's growth. What we haven't had is someone to coordinate it all, someone to help us become a real force in the market. I stared at the map, at the dozens of pins representing talented people who'd been cast aside by Harrison. Each one was a potential ally, a potential collaborator, a potential weapon in a war Harrison didn't even know he was fighting. You want me to help you organize this network? Rachel smiled. I want you to help me destroy Harrison's monopoly on talent. And I want you to do it by building something so much better than Pinnacle that clients will abandon him in droves. For the first time since that humiliating meeting in Harrison's office, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. I spent the weekend walking around Denver trying to wrap my head around what Rachel had shown me. The network of former Pinnacle employees was impressive, but coordinating them into a cohesive force would be a massive undertaking, and there was no guarantee it would work. Zara found me Sunday morning on our apartment balcony, staring out at the mountains with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands. "You've been thinking about Rachel's offer," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "It's not just an offer," I said. "It's a war. Rachel wants to take down Harrison, and she wants me to help her do it." And I keep thinking about what he said, about how I'd be bankrupt in 6 months, about how I'm not special. Zara was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know, maybe. I've never run a business before. I've never managed people or handled finances or—" "Dante," she interrupted, "you've been doing all of that at Pinnacle. You just weren't getting credit for it." She was right. I'd been managing teams, developing strategies, building client relationships. The only difference was that Harrison had been taking the credit and the profits. "What if I fail?" I said. "What if he's right and I don't have what it takes?" "Then you'll fail," Zara said simply. "And you'll learn something and you'll try again. But if you don't try, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been." Monday morning I called Rachel. "I'm in," I said. "But I want to do more than just coordinate your network. I want to build something new, something that doesn't just compete with Pinnacle, something that makes them irrelevant." "I was hoping you'd say that," Rachel said. "How quickly can you put together a business plan?" "I already have one," I said, thinking about the documents I'd been working on for months. "I just need to scale it up." "Good. Because I have 3 clients who are getting tired of Harrison's approach. They're looking for something fresh, something innovative, something that actually puts their needs first instead of stroking the ego of the agency owner." As I hung up the phone, I realized I'd crossed a point of no return. I wasn't just leaving Pinnacle. I was declaring war on everything Harrison represented: the old boys network, the credit stealing, the systematic destruction of talent. Harrison had laughed at my ambition. Now he was going to find out what that ambition could build. The first meeting of what Rachel dubbed the Liberation Network took place in her warehouse office on a Tuesday night in April. 12 former Pinnacle employees, now running their own firms or working at competing agencies, gathered around a conference table made from reclaimed wood and industrial pipes. Sarah Chen had flown in from Seattle. Marcus was there, along with people I'd heard about but never met. James Park, who'd started a successful content marketing firm in Portland. Elena Rodriguez, who'd built a data analytics company in Phoenix. David Kim, who'd launched a social media management service in Salt Lake City. "We all have the same story," Sarah said, kicking off the meeting. "Harrison identified our talents, exploited them, took credit for our work, then pushed us out when we became threats to his ego." The stories were remarkably similar. Each person had developed signature strategies or innovative approaches that had become part of Pinnacle's service offerings. Each had been promised promotions or partnerships that never materialized. Each had been systematically undermined until they left. "But here's what Harrison didn't count on," I said, standing up to address the group. "He didn't just create competitors. He created a network of people who understand his methods, his weaknesses, his client base." I pulled up a presentation I'd spent the weekend preparing. "Rachel asked me to coordinate this network, but I want to propose something bigger. What if we didn't just collaborate informally? What if we created a formal alliance?" The room went quiet. Elena leaned forward. "You're talking about a consortium." "I'm talking about a revolution," I said. "A network of independent firms that share resources, refer clients, and present a unified alternative to the traditional agency model. Instead of one CEO taking credit for everyone's work, we create a system where everyone gets recognition and everyone shares in the success." James raised his hand. "What about Harrison? What about Pinnacle?" "We don't attack them directly," I said. "We make them irrelevant. We offer clients something better: transparency, collaboration, innovation without ego. We let our work speak for itself." The energy in the room was electric. These were people who'd been burned by the traditional system, who'd built successful businesses despite being told they'd fail. They were ready for something different. By the end of the meeting, we'd outlined the structure of what would become the Creative Liberation Alliance, a network of independent firms that would operate under shared principles and mutual support. "Harrison thinks he won when he pushed us out," Sarah said as we wrapped up. He has no idea what he's unleashed. The Creative Liberation Alliance officially launched 6 months later, with 8 founding firms and a combined client base of over 200 companies. Our collaborative approach was revolutionary. Instead of competing with each other, we referred clients to whichever firm was best suited for their needs. Instead of one person taking credit, we highlighted the contributions of individual team members across the network. The market response was immediate and overwhelming. Clients loved the transparency, the specialization, the fact that they were working with people who actually cared about their success, rather than just building an agency owner's ego. But success came with unexpected challenges. Harrison had noticed our growth and wasn't taking it well. Marcus called me one morning, his voice tight with concern. "Harrison's been reaching out to my clients," he said. "Not to steal them, but to spread rumors about our financial stability. He's telling people we're a fly-by-night operation that will collapse within a year." It wasn't just Marcus. Elena reported similar calls to her Phoenix clients. Sarah's Seattle firm was facing sudden competitive audits from companies that had never shown interest before. Harrison was mobilizing his network to undermine ours. "He's scared," Rachel said during our weekly alliance call. "We're not just competing with him anymore. We're exposing his entire business model as outdated and exploitative." But the attacks escalated. Harrison started poaching our junior employees with inflated salary offers. He began underbidding on our proposals, sometimes at rates that couldn't possibly be profitable. Most concerning, he'd started spreading rumors about my personal finances, suggesting that I was leveraging the alliance to cover my own business failures. "This is getting personal," Zara said one night after I'd spent hours on the phone dealing with another crisis. "Maybe you should back off. Let the alliance operate without you being so visible." "I can't do that," I said. "This isn't just about business anymore. Harrison's trying to destroy something good, something that's helping people. If I step back now, I'm letting him win." But privately, I was starting to worry. Harrison had resources, connections, and a ruthless willingness to do whatever it took to maintain his position. The alliance was strong, but we were still small compared to Pinnacle's established presence. Then Sarah called with news that changed everything. "Nexus Technologies wants to leave Pinnacle," she said. "The account you landed for Harrison, they're tired of his ego and his credit stealing. They want to work with the alliance." Nexus was a $500,000 annual account. More importantly, they were a prestige client whose endorsement would validate our entire approach. "There's just one problem," Sarah continued. "They want to work with you specifically. They remember your original strategy, and they want the person who actually created it." The irony was perfect. Harrison had stolen credit for my work, but the client knew the truth. Now they wanted to work with the real strategist, not the thief. The meeting with Nexus Technologies was scheduled for a Thursday morning in September, exactly 1 year after Harrison had fired me. I'd prepared extensively, developing a comprehensive strategy that built on the original work I'd done while incorporating the collaborative approach of the Creative Liberation Alliance. But as I walked into the Nexus conference room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Harrison was already there, sitting at the head of the table with a confident smile and a presentation folder that looked suspiciously similar to mine. "Dante," he said, not getting up from his chair. "I was wondering when you'd show up. I hope you don't mind that I accepted Nexus's invitation as well. They wanted to hear from both of us before making their decision." The Nexus team looked uncomfortable. Their CMO, Jennifer Walsh, cleared her throat. "We weren't expecting both agencies to be here simultaneously. Perhaps we should reschedule." "No need," Harrison interrupted. "I think it's healthy for Dante to see how real professionals handle client relationships. Consider this a learning opportunity." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. He was trying to recreate the power dynamic from our old office, to make me feel small and unprepared in front of a client. But I'd learned something in the past year. I'd learned that confidence built on stolen ideas is brittle. I'd learned that networks built on exploitation eventually collapse. And I'd learned that the truth, when presented clearly and backed by results, is more powerful than any amount of bluster. "Actually," I said, taking a seat across from Harrison, I think this is perfect. Jennifer, your team deserves to hear from both approaches. You should know exactly who you're working with. For the next hour, Harrison presented his strategy. It was polished, professional, and entirely based on work I'd done at Pinnacle. He talked about his innovative approach to digital integration, his understanding of the tech market, his track record of success. When he finished, Jennifer turned to me. Dante, we'd like to hear your perspective. I stood up, but instead of going to the presentation screen, I walked to the whiteboard in the corner of the room. Before I show you my strategy, I said, I want to tell you about the Creative Liberation Alliance. It's a network of independent firms that operates on a simple principle. The person who does the work gets the credit. I drew a diagram showing how the alliance functioned, how clients worked directly with the strategists who developed their campaigns, how success was measured not just in revenue but in the growth and recognition of individual team members. Harrison just presented you with a strategy, I continued, but he didn't tell you who actually created it. That strategy was developed by me while I was working at Pinnacle. Harrison took credit for it then, just like he's taking credit for it now. The room was silent. Harrison's face had gone pale. You can verify this, I said to Jennifer. Check the timestamps on the original documents. Look at the metadata. The strategy Harrison just presented was created on my computer during hours when Harrison was out of the office. Jennifer looked at Harrison, then back at me. Is this true? Harrison tried to recover. Dante was part of my team. All work done at Pinnacle is collaborative. No, I said firmly. It's not. You took credit for my work, for Marcus's work, for Sarah Chen's work, for dozens of talented people who trusted you. You built your reputation on stolen ideas. I turned back to the whiteboard and began outlining my actual strategy for Nexus. Not the old approach Harrison had stolen, but a new framework that incorporated everything I'd learned from the Alliance. It was innovative, collaborative, and transparent. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. Then Jennifer spoke. I think we've heard enough. Harrison, thank you for coming. We'll be in touch. The dismissal was clear. As Harrison gathered his materials and left the room, I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear. The Nexus contract was just the beginning. Word spread quickly through the industry that Harrison had been caught taking credit for work he hadn't done. The Creative Liberation Alliance's transparent approach suddenly looked not just innovative, but necessary. Over the next 18 months, 6 major clients left Pinnacle for alliance firms. Harrison's response was predictable. He doubled down on the credit stealing, began taking even more aggressive ownership of his remaining employees' work. But the industry was watching now, and the pattern was obvious. The turning point came when Sarah Chen published an article in Marketing Week titled, The Emperor's New Campaigns, How One Agency Built Its Reputation on Stolen Ideas. She didn't name Harrison or Pinnacle directly, but she didn't need to. The industry knew exactly who she was talking about. The article went viral. Former Pinnacle employees began speaking out publicly about their experiences. Clients started asking uncomfortable questions about who had actually developed their strategies. Harrison's carefully constructed reputation began crumbling. But the real victory wasn't Harrison's downfall. It was what we'd built to replace it. The Creative Liberation Alliance had grown to 22 firms across the western United States. Our collaborative model was being studied by business schools. Our transparent approach to credit and compensation was being adopted by agencies worldwide. I was in my office, my actual office, in the converted warehouse space I'd leased in the same building as Rachel, when my assistant knocked on the door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "He says he has an appointment, but I don't see anything on your calendar." I looked up from the campaign proposal I'd been reviewing. "Who is it?" She handed me a business card. Harrison Blackwood, Principal Strategist, Independent Consultant, not CEO of Pinnacle, not Creative Director. Harrison had finally run out of other people's ideas to steal. "Should I tell him you're busy?" my assistant asked. I thought about it for a moment, about the humiliation in his office, about the laugh that had echoed off his glass walls, about the year of doubt and struggle that had followed. "No," I said finally. Send him in. Harrison looked smaller somehow when he walked into my office. The custom suits had been replaced by off-the-rack business casual. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by something I'd never seen in him before: humility. "Dante," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Thank you for seeing me." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same chair where I'd sat countless times in his office, waiting for recognition that never came. "What can I do for you, Harrison?" He sat down heavily, looking around at the exposed brick walls, the industrial lighting, the creative energy that permeated the space. "I wanted to talk to you about a potential opportunity. I've been doing some independent consulting work, and I think I could be valuable to your organization." The words hung in the air between us. Harrison Blackwood, the man who'd laughed at my ambition, was asking me for a job. "I know we had our differences at Pinnacle," he continued, "but I've learned a lot in the past year. About leadership, about giving credit where it's due, about the value of collaborative work environments." I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. There was no trace of the arrogance that had defined him at Pinnacle. No condescension, no assumption of superiority. Just a man who'd lost everything and was trying to rebuild. "Harrison," I said carefully, "what exactly are you offering?" "My network," he said. "I still have relationships with major clients across the industry. I could help bring business to the alliance, help bridge the gap between traditional agencies and your collaborative model." It was a reasonable offer. Harrison did have connections, and despite everything, he understood the industry. But I thought about the 12 people he'd pushed out, the dozens of careers he'd derailed, the systematic theft of credit and ideas that had defined his tenure at Pinnacle. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally, "but I don't think it's the right fit." Harrison's face fell. "Is this about revenge? Because I understand if you're still angry about what happened." "It's not about revenge," I interrupted. "It's about values. The alliance was built on principles of transparency, collaboration, and mutual respect. Those aren't just marketing buzzwords for us. They're the foundation of everything we do." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Denver skyline. You had every opportunity to build something like this at Pinnacle. You had talented people, good clients, resources. But instead of lifting people up, you tore them down. Instead of sharing credit, you hoarded it. Instead of building careers, you destroyed them. I turned back to face him. "I'm not interested in revenge, Harrison. I'm interested in building something better, something that proves there's another way to do business." Harrison sat quietly for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, getting up from his chair. "I probably deserve that." As he walked toward the door, I felt something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not satisfaction, not vindication, but genuine sadness for a man who'd had everything and thrown it away because he couldn't stand to share. "Harrison," I called out as he reached the door. He turned back. "Good luck with your consulting work. I hope you find what you're looking for." He nodded once, then left. I watched from my window as he walked to his car. Not the Tesla, but a modest sedan that had seen better days. 3 years later, the Creative Liberation Alliance had grown to 47 firms across North America. Harrison had moved to Phoenix, where he ran a small consulting practice focused on helping agencies transition to more collaborative models. We'd never spoken again, but I'd heard he'd become an advocate for the same principles he'd once dismissed. Zara and I had married the previous spring. She'd opened her own gallery in the same arts district where my office was located. We'd bought a house in the foothills with a view of the mountains, where we could see the sunrise every morning and remember how far we'd come. The alliance had become more than a business network. It had become a movement. Universities were teaching case studies about our collaborative model. The Harrison Survivors Club had become a legitimate professional organization focused on supporting entrepreneurs who'd been pushed out of traditional employment. But the real measure of success wasn't in the numbers or the recognition. It was in the young strategists who joined alliance firms knowing they'd get credit for their work. It was in the clients who trusted us because they knew we'd be transparent about our processes. It was in the culture we'd created where lifting each other up was more valuable than tearing each other down. Harrison had been right about one thing. Starting my own firm had been a journey, but he'd been wrong about the destination. I hadn't just survived, I'd thrived. And in doing so, I'd proven that sometimes the best revenge is simply building something better than what came before. The laugh that had echoed off his glass walls that day had been meant to diminish me. Instead, it had liberated me. And in that liberation, I'd found something worth more than any promotion he could have offered. The knowledge that I'd built something meaningful, something lasting, something that would continue to grow long after his